All right, buckle up for a deep dive into some seriously strange territory. It's a world of Psy-Terror, implants, and energy harvesting.
Sounds like the start of a sci-fi thriller, right?
It does, but this is actually a real YouTube video we're going to be exploring today.
The video is called 2172 Psy-Terror, Irina, Psy-Terror, Estrazione di personalità proiettate in rete olografica.
Oh, wow, that's a mouthful.
It is, and it features a hypnotist named Calogero working with a woman, Irina.
And this is where things start to get interesting, right?
Yeah, so the video's in Italian,
Ah,
but we've got the transcript translated into English just for this deep dive. So let's unpack this together. What do you say?
let's do it.
Irina claims she's been under this Psy-Terror her entire life.
Like some kind of psychic interference.
Yeah, like she can't shake it.
And she attributes all this to a physical implant she believes is in her coccygorex, connecting her to a vast network. She even describes these hot energy flows running along her spine. Okay, hold on a second. Implants. Energy flows. Sounds pretty out there. But before we just dismiss this as pure fantasy, maybe we can look at what this might reveal about Irina's state of mind.
That's a really good point. So whether or not we believe in the literal truth of her claims, I think it's definitely worth considering what these descriptions might symbolize, right?
Right.
For example, the feeling of being controlled or manipulated, that can often manifest as a physical sensation in the body.
Yeah, like when you get that knot in your stomach when you're stressed, or like a tension headache.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like it's a way for her subconscious to communicate these complex emotions through really vivid imagery.
So maybe these implants and energy flows are Irina's way of expressing this profound sense of invasion or violation that she feels.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
All right, let's delve a little deeper into this hypnotic session, shall we?
Sounds good.
Under Kalager's guidance, Irina encounters an entity named Igor within this network.
Interesting.
Now, Igor is described as a holographic projection, which is interesting because it immediately raises questions about the nature of reality and perception in this hypnotic state.
Right, and it's worth clarifying what a holographic projection even means in this context. I mean, it's not necessarily a literal hologram like you'd see at a concert. It's more like a mental image or a symbol that emerges from Irina's subconscious mind.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And this Igor character, she believes that he controls her connection to the network, but the session takes kind of an interesting turn when Caladro actually orders Igor to disconnect from Irina.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, almost like he's asserting his power over this entity.
Yeah, that power dynamic is really fascinating. It seems like Calogero, as the hypnotist, is trying to empower Irina by challenging this perceived source of control. It's almost like he's saying, you don't have to be controlled by this. You have the power to break free.
Yeah, I get that. So maybe this encounter with Igor isn't so much about a literal entity, but rather a representation of the control that Irina feels in her life, whatever the source might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it highlights how hypnosis can be such a powerful tool for exploring these internal struggles and working through them symbolically.
Now let's talk about this network itself. Irina paints a picture of this vast web with humans encased in pods and their energy being harvested.
It sounds like something straight out of the Matrix.
It really does.
Definitely a striking image. And this idea of energy harvesting is interesting. In many spiritual traditions, energy is seen as this vital life force, right? So the idea of it being siphoned away, well, that can represent a feeling of depletion or exploitation.
So is this like a common theme in these types of sessions, this fear of being connected to some larger system that's draining us of our energy?
You know, it's not uncommon to encounter anxieties about being controlled or manipulated by unseen forces, especially, in a world where technology is increasingly interwoven with our lives. And remember, the network itself, it doesn't even have to be literal. It could represent any system or structure that Irina feels trapped within.
This brings us to a curious detail. Irina observes that this phenomenon, this Psy-Terror, it's concentrated in Russia and primarily affects young people. She doesn't see any elderly individuals connected to this network. What do you make of that?
That's a great question. It could be that these details are simply part of the narrative that Irina's subconscious mind has created. Or perhaps it reflects her personal anxieties about societal influences, particularly those that target, the young.
So maybe she sees Russia, or just youth culture in general, as being particularly vulnerable to manipulation.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. These hypnosis sessions, they often tap into our deepest fears and anxieties, right? And the way they manifest can be very symbolic.
And the session takes another twist when Irina, guided by Calogero, attempts to identify those responsible for this network. They go through various locations, Switzerland, the USA, even Mexico gets mentioned.
Hmm. The search for the source of control. It's a pretty common theme in narratives about manipulation, I'd say. It speaks to a desire to understand who or what is pulling the strings, to make sense of the chaos.
But instead of focusing on the specific locations, maybe we can look at this more broadly. What does this search tell us about Irina's state of mind?
It suggests a feeling of powerlessness, a sense that she's caught in a web that she doesn't fully understand. So by trying to identify those in control, she's trying to reclaim some agency, to make sense of her experience.
That makes a lot of sense. And just as we're starting to unravel this web, a new character enters the scene, Ivan. Now, Ivan is initially under the control of this entity in a protective booth, but he eventually breaks free and reveals some startling information.
Wow. So Ivan's entrance, that adds another layer of complexity to the narrative. His initial state of being controlled, could represent that feeling of helplessness that we were just discussing, that sense of being trapped in a system beyond our control.
And his eventual liberation offers a glimmer of hope. It suggests that even in these seemingly hopeless situations, there's always a possibility of breaking free.
Exactly. It's a powerful message about the resilience of the human spirit,
Yeah.
even in the face of overwhelming odds.
And we'll dive deeper into Ivan's revelations and what they mean for Irina in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned because this is where things get even more intriguing. Welcome back. Last time we left off with the arrival of this new character, Ivan. He was initially controlled by some mysterious entity, but managed to break free. It's all getting a bit stranger things around here. But before we jump into Ivan's revelations, I'm curious about this idea of Psy-Terror itself. Is there any scientific basis for this kind of, psychic manipulation?
Well, from a scientific standpoint, there's no concrete evidence to support the existence of Psy-Terror, as it's described in the video. However, the concept does tap into some very real human fears about control and manipulation, especially, in this age of information overload and advanced technology.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're constantly bombarded with information, and it can feel like we're being influenced in ways we don't even realize.
Exactly. And this feeling of vulnerability, it can be amplified even more when we consider these emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and brain-computer interfaces.
Yeah.
I mean, these technologies hold incredible potential, but they also raise these ethical questions about, the potential for misuse.
So even if Psy-Terror isn't a real phenomenon in the literal sense, it still speaks to these very real anxieties that we have about the future of technology and the potential for mind control.
Precisely. It's a reflection of our collective fears about the unknown and the potential for our minds to be manipulated in ways that we can't even imagine.
Okay, let's get back to this session. Yvonne makes this shocking revelation that Irina was actually sold into this network. And there's even this partner system involved in this exchange. It sounds like some kind of interdimensional human trafficking operation.
Right. It's a disturbing image.
Uh,
And it kind of speaks to this deeper theme of exploitation and commodification. The idea of being sold into this network that highlights Irina's perceived lack of agency, her feeling of being treated as a mere object rather than, a human being.
It's like her consciousness, her very being, is being exploited for someone else's gain.
Right. And this notion of a partner system, that adds another layer of intrigue, right? It suggests this network of individuals or entities that are working together to maintain this system of control.
It's almost like a conspiracy theory come to life, with these unseen forces manipulating people for their own sinister purposes.
And it's worth noting that these conspiracy theories often thrive in times of uncertainty and anxiety. When people feel like they've lost control, they often seek explanations that offer a sense of order and meaning, even if those explanations are, far-fetched.
So maybe Irina's claims about this network, this Psy-Terror, are a way for her to make sense of the chaos she feels in her own life.
It's certainly a possibility. These beliefs, whether or not they're based in reality, provide a framework for understanding her experiences and give her a sense of agency, right? In a situation where she feels powerless.
As the session progresses, Calogero takes on a more aggressive approach. He starts using electric shocks on Ivan and employing these shock frequencies to disrupt the network's infrastructure. He even destroys the protective booth and the computer.
This escalation in tactics, it's pretty interesting. It could be interpreted as Caludra's attempt to break through the layers of control and liberate Irina from this perceived web of manipulation, His use of force, it might be a metaphorical way of fighting back against these forces that he believes are holding her captive.
It's like he's waging war on this network, using whatever weapons he has at his disposal.
And it's important to remember that this is all happening within the context of a hypnotic session. So, the boundaries between reality and imagination, they're pretty blurred.
Right, so these shock frequencies and the destruction of the booth and the computer, those might not be literal events, but rather symbolic representations of Caligiro's attempts to break down the systems of control that Irina feels trapped within.
Exactly. It's this symbolic battle playing out in the theater of the subconscious mind.
And then we come to the climax of the session, Irina's liberation. She describes this large cable disconnecting from her chest, these neural connections pushing out foreign objects, and Calogero guides her to expel any remaining implants through a portal.
Whoa. So this liberation sequence, it's incredibly vivid and symbolic. The disconnecting cable, the expulsion of these foreign objects, all the portal imagery, it all points to breaking free from these constraints of the network and reclaiming her own energy and consciousness.
It's almost like an exorcism, but with a futuristic twist.
It's a really powerful image of transformation and empowerment. It suggests that even in the darkest of situations, there's always hope for liberation.
But even after this dramatic liberation, Irina is left feeling kind of disoriented and unsure of herself. She describes difficulty speaking, as if everything is moving in slow motion.
Yeah, this aftermath is fascinating because it raises questions about, like, the potential psychological impact of such an experience.
Yeah.
Imagine having your sense of self, your memories, even your very perception of reality manipulated in such a profound way. So, the process of reintegration, of reclaiming one's identity, that could be quite challenging.
It's like she's been unplugged from this reality she'd been plugged into for so long, and now she's struggling to adjust back to the real world. It's like some kind of re-entry trauma.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It highlights the potential disorientation and confusion that can accompany such a profound shift in perception.
And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore the aftermath of Irina's experience and delve into Calagero's closing monologue, where he offers some thought-provoking insights on the nature of entities, hypnosis, and the power of the human will. Stay tuned. Okay, so we've gone through this really bizarre hypnotic session, and this whole concept of Psy-Terror is, I gotta say, it's a bit unsettling.
Yeah.
Even if we just approach it all from a purely symbolic perspective, you know, it makes you think about the power of the mind,
Absolutely.
both to create and to be influenced.
For sure.
It gets even more interesting when we consider Calagero's closing monologue, right? He deconstructs this whole idea of destroying entities in hypnosis, suggesting that it's more about banishing them from one's energetic space rather than actually like annihilating them.
Yeah.
So when he's using these shock frequencies and like dismantling this whole network,
Yeah.
it's not about literal destruction.
Yeah.
It's more like the symbolic way of severing those connections, those
Yeah.
perceived sources of control.
That's a really interesting distinction.
It is. And, you know, it brings us back to the question we've been kind of grappling with this whole time.
Yeah.
Is any of this real?
Right.
Or is it all just a fabrication of Irina's subconscious mind?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think ultimately it's up to each individual to decide what they believe.
For sure.
The important thing is that we approach these kinds of claims with critical thinking and discernment.
Absolutely.
Not just taking everything at face value.
But even if we don't take it all literally, there's still a lot to unpack here.
I agree.
Irina's experience, regardless of its basis in reality, speaks to some very real human fears about control, manipulation, and the unseen forces that might be shaping our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's this reminder that the mind is a powerful and mysterious thing, right? It can be a source of immense creativity and resilience.
Yeah.
But it can also be vulnerable to suggestion, to influence, and even to self-deception.
And Calogero makes a really important point, too.
Okay.
He says attributing our problems solely to external entities.
Yeah.
Like these psychic attackers or energy vampires.
Right.
That shows a lack of awareness about our own personal responsibility and the power of our own will.
That's so true.
We're not just passive victims of circumstance.
No, not at all.
We have the power to choose our thoughts, our beliefs, and our actions.
I like that.
And, while we may not always be able to control what happens to us, we can control how we respond.
Absolutely. That's a really empowering way to look at it.
So after delving into this strange world of Psy-Terror and hypnotic sessions and the battle for control, what are we left with? What's the takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that the mind is a fascinating and complex terrain.
For sure.
And whether or not we believe in the literal truth of Irina's claims, her experience offers a valuable opportunity for reflection.
Okay.
It invites us to question our assumptions about reality, to explore the power of the subconscious mind, and to consider the ways in which we might be influenced by unseen forces, both internal and external. It's a reminder that the journey of self-discovery is an ongoing process, and sometimes those most profound insights come from exploring those darkest corners of our own minds.
I think that's a great way to sum it up.
So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
That's what we're all about.
You never know what treasures you might uncover along the way.
You never know.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.